Hello and welcome back to the Homestead Fam. Today we are going to be canning up some beef stew, and actually it's going to be venison stew today because we got a lot of deer this year. But if you are following along with this recipe, then you can go ahead and just use beef or venison if you have it too. But before we get started, make sure to hit that subscribe button and hit that little bell so that you don't miss any of our future videos, and let's dive right in. First, we're going to start by getting out all of our supplies, and as you can see, these jars need a good cleaning, so we're going to wash those in hot soapy water, and then we will bring them back to the table to fill them. Now that our jars are drying, they're over here. I'm going to let them just sit there and just air dry while I cut up all of our veggies. I'm going to skin the potatoes. I'm going to skin the carrots, chop them up. Our meat is already diced up from when we processed our deer. So that's all set. And then I also pre-chopped some onions, and I'm also going to throw some frozen peas in there because I like peas in my stew. And then we are going to top that off with some broth, and then we will come back for the pressure canning part that I'll show you how you should do this, how long of time, and how to prep and safely cook everything. So let's get into chopping. Okay, now that we have all of our ingredients prepared, I have venison cubed up here. I've got carrots, onions, potatoes, and I have peas. But you can do really anything you want here. There's really no recipe, just your meats. You could even just do a vegetable stew, but you could put corn, you could do cabbage, or you could omit any of these as well. There's really no wrong way to do this. And then you can also customize your seasonings later. So I'm going to grab my jars that are done air drying over here, and we're going to bring them over and we're going to start stuffing them with our vegetables, and then we're going to end it with stuffing them with our meat on top and seasoning, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the pressure canner. Okay, so I just grabbed a couple jars and I'm going to start filling these, and I'm not even going to measure. I'm just putting them in about what I think I will like with the different vegetables. It really just depends on how you like your stew. If you like it with a lot of meat or lots of vegetables or lots of potatoes, just go ahead and do the combination that you like best. So now I'm going in with my peas, and I'm going to kind of press these down because we want as much in there as possible until they become about 3/4 from the top, because at that point I am going to add the meat. Okay, now that they are about 3/4 full, I'm going to go in and start stuffing my meat inside. So just go right ahead and really squish this down. We want little as air as possible in there. And then you're going to squish that down until it's about inch head space. So that just means an inch from the top of your jar. This meat is really cold. It's been sitting outside because it's winter and it's freezing out there and we don't have any freezer space. Hence I am canning this. Okay, so this is about 3/4 from, or not 3/4, this is about an inch from the top. So now I'm going to finish all of my jars, and I'll come back to show you how we add the seasonings and broth. To my surprise, the only thing we had left over was some more venison, so I'm probably going to use that for dinner tonight and make some probably like venison and potatoes, or we do this thing called candied venison. I shouldn't say we, my husband created this thing called candied venison, and you fry it in a cast iron pan with some either honey or brown sugar and butter and onions, and it is just so good. So we might make that tonight and put it over some potatoes or rice or noodles, whichever. But now that we have our jars full, they are looking so nice. I love the way jars and canned goods look. It just feels so like rewarding. So what we're gonna do is we are now gonna go in with our seasonings. You can see I have here my lids and bands that are ready to go, but first we're gonna add our seasonings and our broth over top. And you can really do whatever seasonings you want here. Again, this is all preference. You don't necessarily need to follow a recipe other than how you actually cook it in the pressure canner. So we're gonna do some garlic powder. I'm gonna do some pepper and some salt. And I might add a little bit of, let's see. I really like celery salt, so I might add some of that. I think I'm gonna add some oregano too. Okay, so we're just gonna measure with our hearts here and go on in with some seasonings. I love garlic, but garlic powder is very strong, so we're just gonna do a little touch at the top. And remember that your broth is gonna have flavor as well, so don't go too heavy on this. Unless you were just filling it with water, which you could do too. It's just not gonna be as super flavorful. And now I'm gonna add some pepper and the celery salt. And I didn't do a whole lot of regular salt because I was adding the celery salt, and there's gonna be broth. So I don't want a whole lot. I don't want it to be too salty. I feel like that's a little bit too much in there. I'm just gonna put that to the side. Okay. And I didn't do the oregano yet, so we're gonna go in with that. This is one thing I love about canning, is you can kind of easily throw things together and it's gonna be absolutely delicious. But instead of like, I don't meal plan at our house, so I don't like take a Sunday to like meal plan like what we're having like each weekday night, or like sit there and put together, like make a batch of rice and like put it all together in sections and stuff for us. This is what I do. I put meals together in jars, and then they go to our pantry, and we can go out there and grab a bunch of different things off the shelf, no matter what day of the week it is, no matter what time frame we have. If we only have like a half an hour or 20 minutes to make something, I can go out there and get some food on the table for those quick nights, and that's exactly what this is gonna be. Now we have to add our broth over top. So now I have my broth, and just a reminder that you're not gonna need a ton of broth because you packed your jars so full of vegetables that you're really not gonna need a ton. So keep that in mind. Before I do that, I'm gonna grab my funnel and my debubbler. Okay, so I've got my funnel and I've got my debubbler. We're just gonna like poke this down in to make sure the broth can get in all of those holes, because we want the least amount of air in there as possible. So we're just gonna poke that down in. As you can see, I poked all the way through this. You don't want to see any air bubbles down in there because we want to remove as much air as possible. And then we're going to check the headspace. So this is my headspace tool, and I want it an inch from the top, and it is just a little over that. So I'm going to dump just a little bit out, and right there we are. So this one is ready to go. Now to repeat that process for the rest of these. And when you're doing this, you'll see the reason why you need this tool so bad, or even like the back end of a wooden spoon or something. Because when you pour this in, it looks like it's like already full, because it doesn't automatically go down to the bottom because you packed your meat in there so much. Okay, we are on our last jar. So topping this off with the last bit of broth we have. This ended up taking me about 2.5 quarts of broth. So keep that in mind when you are making yours, and just know that just because you're doing 7 quarts doesn't mean you need 7 quarts of broth. Now that we have all of these filled, they are ready to get cleaned up, put our lids and bands on, and then head to the pressure canner. So let me show you how to do that. So what I'm going to do is just wipe my lids with a damp paper towel. And a lot of people like to use vinegar for this too. It really just depends on personal preference and how dirty your jars are. So these aren't really that dirty. I tend to find that tomatoes get the dirtiest because they like get sticky and can really stick to the tops of your jars. But I can usually wipe these down pretty good with just a damp paper towel. And the reasoning for this is because you don't want any grime on the top. So you want to make sure you have a clean glass rim that your lids can stick nicely to and seal nicely to. Now that these are all cleaned off, I'm going to take my clean lids and just place them on top. Now, I am very hopeful that these will all seal today. These are not my favorite lids. I am all out of my 4 jars lids, which is what I prefer to use. I will link those down below. And they are on their way, and I just got I saw the UPS truck just pulled in and got a package, and I was really hoping it was going to be my lids, and it wasn't. It was a car part for my husband. So we are going to use these anyway. So now we're going to put on our bands, and we're just going to do that fingertip tight. So what that means is you are going to hold it with your fingertips and just go as far as your fingertips can go, and don't do it with your elbow or anything, because you want it to just hold the lid on, but you don't want it to be super tight because you want it to be able to like siphon out the air. If you don't tighten it tight enough, then your lids won't stay in place as they should, and if you tighten them too much, then they won't be able to siphon like they should, and they'll be very hard to get off, and they still might not seal properly. So keep that in mind when you're tightening. So now that these are all ready, we're going to put our cold jars into a cold canner. You never want to put cold jars into a hot canner. That is when your jars will break. So make sure you always put it into the same temperature as your jars. So we're going to put these into our cold canner. And we are going to make sure that they are not touching each other. Because if they rattle a little bit, we don't want them clinging against each other and breaking. Alright, this is how your canner is going to look. We don't have any water in there yet, and they are all arranged and not touching. Like I said, that's the biggest thing to keep in mind here. So now let's go ahead and add some water. The amount of water you put in will depend on your canner, so read the manual. A lot of them will have lines down here, and mine does as well, but a lot of them say 3 inches or 3 quarts. You do not want to fill your canner like water bath canning because you don't want them to boil. You want it to create steam and have enough water in there to create steam and not run out during your processing time. But that's it. You don't want them to boil, you want the steam. Now that these are on, we are going to turn on our stove. Turn it on high, and we are going to put on our lid and seal it on. So you're going to turn it on. So we turn it on, and now we're going to wait for it to start steaming. You can see the steam in this little vent up here, and once that has a steady stream of steam for 10 minutes, that's when we will place on our weight, which will start building the pressure. Alright, she is starting to steam, so we're adding that timer for 10 minutes, and then we will put on the weight. Alright, you can hear that steam right here, and it has been doing this for 10 minutes. So I'm going to take my weight and I'm going to place it on top. And that is going to quiet it down finally, and then it is going to start building pressure. I'm going to cook this at 10 pounds pressure for 90 minutes for these quarts. If you're doing pints, you can do 75 minutes. Alright, so we are now at 10 pounds pressure, so I can go ahead and set my timer. I'm going to set it for 90 minutes. So I can kind of walk away and come back and check on it a little bit. You don't have to necessarily babysit this. So I'm going to go do some household chores, probably do some editing, and I'm going to come back every little bit and just check on my pressure and make sure it's not getting too high, because I know mine likes to run high. It doesn't necessarily dip low. So I turned my heat down to about medium-low heat, and it's sticking pretty consistent at about 13 pounds pressure. So if it stays there, I will be happy, and I will kind of come back and check on it, and then after 90 minutes I will show you what to do next.